Hello my book butterflies, and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be rating the entire Road Dahl series. So this is going to be fun. I do regret to say that I don't have the whole collection, so some of these books are just going to appear right here. But let's just jump right into it, shall we? So the first book that I have for you guys is The Giraffe and the Pelly and Me, and I'm going from bottom to top. So this is my least favorite Roald Dahl book, and I think that it's fine, but the reason I don't really like it is because Roald Dahl is such a fascinating writer. He's like one of those artists like Tim Burton who, in their style, it's kind of supposed to be weird, and yet there's a line between weird and just like weird and beautiful and weird and doesn't make sense. And I think that this book helps to define that line. And this book makes kind of no sense and doesn't really have a big wraparound. I thought the pelicans were super interesting and such a beautiful concept, but as a whole, I just did not like this book. Then the next book I'm going to put in place after it is The Twits. I thought that this book was kind of whatever as well. I think it's interesting though how much revenge plays a part in a lot of Roald Dahl's books, especially revenge regarding like getting back at someone who's genuinely just annoying. Like, it's never like they actually do something super wrong, but that they just deserve reprimandation. The Twits was interesting. I like the creativity of it and things like that, but it also just seemed a little too sad for my taste, and it just kind of left on an unsatisfying note. The next book I'm going to put in that group is Ico Trot. Ico Trot is just kind of, it's whatever. I will say that this book was definitely better at having a clear start to end. The only problem is it's like literally 50 pages, which I personally prefer my books to be longer. I like having longer stories with more detail, more conversations, so that you get deeper characters. So to me, this book didn't actually feel like a book. It felt more like an extremely long poem, because 55 pages it's really not that much. But all in all, it's still a fantastic book, and it's still worth your time to read it. But the next book that I'm going to put in this little ring is Going Solo. This book is definitely not a bad book. It tells the story of it's like the second part to his biography for Road Dahl, where in the first part, which is Boy Adventures of Childhood or Tales of Childhood, that part tells more about his childhood, and this book talks more about his life in the military, moving from England, and he's originally from, I believe, Norway, from Norway to England to Africa to serve in the military, and it also tells and gives us kind of a better insight as to what the military and what war is actually truly like. And I think stories like that, there's definitely books that probably tell that story a little bit better, because this is made for a younger audience, so it can't really go into the brutality of war. Stories like Unbroken, if you are looking for a book that really does talk about war, I think that those kind of books are actually really important in helping to educate people on why war happens, how we can prevent it, things like that. And I think that this book is elemental. But it's also a book where it has one of my biggest pet peeves, and there's super long text with no paragraph breaks, and so it can be just very mentally draining to read a book like this. My next in my lineup is The Magic Finger. This book I found out is very unpopular, and a lot of people haven't even really heard about it, and I think it's really interesting. I liked it a lot. I liked the concept. However, I will say that this book was actually surprisingly really sad as well. I just was unprepared, I think, at 9 years old to read something like that. Like, it's definitely not like a trigger warning worthy thing at all, but it's still, it was weird. It was like a big switch. It felt like Roald Dahl was having a bad day while he wrote that book. So The next book in my lineup is Fantastic Mr. Fox, and a lot of you are going to disagree with me. That's okay. I don't really care. I really do like this book. Like, don't get me wrong. I just feel like this book was a little weird in the way that it felt like the book ended, and then we were supposed to come up with, like, an additional ending. Like, it felt like kind of unfinished, but at the same time it was like, okay, the book is over. Now, what do you think the ending actually was? Like, it was weird. Felt like a fever dream, kind of like a bad trip, a little bit. I love the movie. I watch it with my brother every year, and it's still a good book, which I was holding upside down. So I still think it's worth your time 100%, but it definitely goes in the bottom half of my lineup. The next book, which is also probably going to be really confusing, how this is like a book I didn't actually particularly like, is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I thought this book was kind of whatever. I know everybody and their mother makes memes about how, like, a child will, like, choke on candy or will, like, fall into a river. And, like, all the Oompa Loompas are, like, doing the Macarena, and it's kind of weird, but I like any story that has a rags to riches in it, where a kid is poor and it teaches them to be humble, and because they're humble, they're kind to people, and because they're kind, they're a good person, and because they're a good person, good things happen to them. And I think that that's just an important lesson for children to learn, is that good things happen to people with manners, and good things happen to good people. And I just thought, I still think it's an important story. I actually would make it required reading. I just wouldn't make it required reading before any of these other books. The next book in my lineup is Matilda. And this is the first book I actually remember reading and going, oh my gosh, I love to read. Like, this is one of those, like, really early books. And I think it's because it's a girl who likes to read and has magical powers. And so there might have been a little envy there, as maybe if I read a lot, I'll have magical powers. That did not happen, so -1 point for being disappointing in that regard. But still a great book. I like how in-depth the characters are, and I thought it was really like quite the plot twist, and just an interesting arc as who Miss Honey really is, and like how people can perceive and be perceived one way, and actually what's inside their hearts is another way. Even with like the way that Matilda talks about her family as like they don't totally suck, like they're fine, is also really interesting because it implies that there's something more to her life with them. And I just thought it was a very interesting book. Next in my lineup is Boy Tales or Adventures or whatever of Childhood, which is the first half to Road Dahl's autobiography or biography, I don't know the difference. But it tells this interesting story. I believe he lived in Norway, and while he was living in Norway, he lived with, like, he had a close relationship with his grandparents, and he lived with his mom and his dad, and it tells a story of some sad things that happened. It tells some really funny stories too. It dips into some topics from this book that, like, kind of gets the reader used to the way he talks about war. So I would say that book was kind of made to be like the starter to going solo, but I don't think it's necessarily required. You don't have to read Going Solo after Tales of Adventure, and you don't have to read Tales or Adventure after Going Solo. But I still think it's a really interesting book, and I like all the different stories. However, I will say it was just like a bunch of little stories, so as a whole book, I just don't think I can make it my number one. Next, we have, which I never see this book get talked about, and it makes me really sad, especially considering how it's my top three, and it's my third in my top three, and it's Danny, the Champion of the World. And I thought that this book was super interesting. I liked the vivid imagery of it. I like any story that involves kind of trickery and kind of like, oh, you just did something there, you know? And I also like books that have protagonists that are generally kind of stupid. And stupid in like a Samwise Gamgee, Bilbo, you know, that kind of character way, where it's like, oh, you make you make some pretty bad decisions sometimes, buddy, but you love him anyway, because you know that if you were in their place, you would make the exact same horrible decisions as they do, because in the moment, what do you even think to do when you're under this much pressure? But the book is interesting. It's another one of those books that have really complicated characters, and I really like that as well. All in all, fantastic book. Picking my number one and my number two from these two books was really difficult, and it took me some time, but I think it's worth it. And the second book is George's Marvelous Medicine. I think that this book is fantastic. If you need a one-sentence sum-up, it's about an 8-year-old boy who makes drugs because he hates his grandma. Like, literally, he's 8. And I think it's so funny and just like a wild concept. And I like books that just make you go like, wait, what's happening? And like, it's like a weird fever dream. And this book is entirely unrealistic, but it's like funny, unrealistic, so it requires so much suspension of your disbelief, but it's totally worth it. I think it's so funny. I reread these, my number one and my number two books, on planes, at vacations. I take them everywhere, and I think that this book is fantastic. And then the big reveal, my number one book is James and the Giant Peach. I love this book. It's a fantastic novel. I like the way that he talks about the ants, and the way that he describes his parents, and the way that he describes everything. Like, every single character is so distinct. It's like while you're reading it, you can reach out and touch them, like they're in your room or wherever you read. But I like how every single character, even these little bugs that become like real creatures, are actually distinct and have distinct personalities. I was really mad that the silkworm got cut out in the production of the film making of this. But, you know, it kind of makes sense. It is a slightly expendable character. But all in all, this book is so interesting and so funny. And it's one of those books that just makes you feel like you're floating. And I just really liked it. So that is my ranking. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have authors like this, I'm going to be doing a Shel Silverstein digestion and just kind of summation of all his poems, of the poetry books that I have of him. If you have any authors you would like me to read their collections, I'm working on a Leigh Bardugo and a Colleen Hoover collection right now. And if you want to see more of that kind of stuff, then please let me know. Don't forget to head over onto our website, which will be linked down below as always, which is Fiction Addiction. And go on over and recommend us a book. We can shout out whatever you want as part of recommending that book. And it'll be nice to see, before you have to read it, whether or not it's truly worth your time. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye!